Hello, welcome to a new week. Welcome to a new unit. So, what we're starting on now is Unit 4. We're going to focus on the Civil War. This unit is actually going to take us straight through until winter break. So, just so you have a rough outline, things might change a little bit, but the plan is to talk about lead up to the war. So, some of the political, economic, social things that are happening at the time. We're going to focus in on elections, political changes next week. The week after that, we are going to look at the actual conflict, so the Civil War, the actual battles and whatnot. Thanksgiving break after that, and then 2 weeks we're going to talk about sort of the ramifications of the war, sort of what comes after it. So Reconstruction, um, constitutional amendments, and then we'll talk about how the Reconstruction period ends. We'll have another assessment, and then we'll have winter break after that. Today, I just want to go over a couple things that are going to set the groundwork for the bigger stuff we're going to talk about in this unit. So today we're going to talk about the Mexican-American War, we're going to talk about the Compromise of 1850, and we're going to talk about the Fugitive Slave Law. That was actually a part of the Compromise of 1850. So the first thing is to actually talk about the Mexican-American War. Mexico gains its independence from Spain in 1821. 1845, the US annexes Texas, which we can talk about if we want to during class, but Texas becomes a state is the most important part of that story, I think, for what we're talking about now. War between Mexico and the United States lasts 2 years, from 1846 to 1848. It ends in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. As far as the reasons for the war, we don't have too much time to get into it. Some would argue that it's just manifest destiny, that Americans wanted this war because they wanted this land. If you remember, manifest destiny was the idea of America controlling the land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Some people will say the population of the US is growing, people are moving west, and they just needed this land because they needed to have somewhere to put people. Some would just say because America wanted to. Mexico was a new country. They'd only been around for about 20 years. America was established, and they basically, arguably fought this war and took this land because they could. Um, the war is also known as the U.S. intervention in Mexico. That's generally what it's referred to as in Mexico. Just to give you a little bit of context, this is not seen as a war where two sides at the same time decided they were going to fight each other over like land or resources. This was more the U.S. deciding they wanted the land and starting a war in order to take it. Only thing I kind of want to point out from this map right now, none of these states exist at the time. So this is all kind of open land. Statehood is going to come later. As we've talked about, new states tend to be where we have conflicts about slavery. So this new territory that the US gets from Mexico means new states. These new states mean that we're going to talk about slavery again. So if you remember this map, this is a map of the Compromise of 1820. Just to kind of refresh your memories, we have the 3630 line here. The Compromise of 1820 said that this line extended all the way to the Pacific Ocean is going to determine what's a slave state and what's a free state. That was sort of supposed to be the point of the compromise, to solve the slave state versus free state problem once and for all. If I go back, you will notice, actually, let's see, under Missouri. So you will notice that if you draw the line all the way out, you have a lot more states north of the line than you do south of the line. If you've been paying attention at all, that's not going to go very smoothly once we get into it. We'll talk about it more during our class this week, but here's just sort of an overview. So problems with the Missouri Compromise. As I mentioned, there was more land north of the 3630 than below it. California would be split in half. California is both north and south. So when California applies for statehood, that's going to be a problem. What about what the people in new states want? So we have this compromise, but people are going to be in that territory and they're going to either want it to be a free state or a slave state, regardless of where it is. That's going to lead to some conflicts. And also times have changed. So we talked a little bit about the spreading of ideas during the era of social change. You have a lot more of just a plain moral objection to slavery. It's growing more in the North and West, as people are just like, where before they might have been like, oh, I don't want slaves. Now they're saying like, no, slavery is like morally wrong. We should not have slavery at all. Also, the South is getting worried, sort of related to that. As there's more moral objection to slavery, the South is actually getting worried that something is going to happen and they're going to lose slavery altogether. So our friend Henry Clay from the Missouri Compromise proposes a new compromise. This is the Compromise of 1850. Henry Clay still doing his thing. Here's the 4 important points. California will be admitted as a free state. Slave trade is outlawed in DC. So the trade is outlawed, not slavery. Popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is just that each state will get to decide for themselves whether they want to be a slave state or a free state. You'll notice that that actually is the part of the compromise that pretty much ends the Missouri Compromise. And then the 4th point is the new fugitive slave law. The new fugitive slave law, let me move this so you can read it, basically requires all citizens to turn in escaped slaves. As mentioned, there is a moral objection to slavery growing in the North. A lot of Northerners specifically were unhappy with this law because it basically bound them to enforce a system that they disagreed with. If you were morally if you morally objected to slavery and you were told you have to turn slaves over, you're not going to be too happy about that. The law also denies the right to trial by jury to runaway slaves and offers cash rewards to people who turn in these runaway slaves. I want to highlight the word runaway there because if there's a cash reward and these quote unquote runaway slaves don't have a right to trial by jury, you're going to run the risk of free Black people in the North basically being caught for the cash reward and then sent to the South. Because they can't defend themselves in court, there's really no way for them to prove necessarily that they are not runaway slaves. So yes, how would a free Black person prove they weren't a runaway slave if they were denied trial by jury? In practice, if a white person accused you of being an escaped slave for the reward, you ran the risk of being sent into slavery. And that's actually it. That's all I wanted to talk to you about today. We're going to get a little deeper into some of this during our class this week, but this is just going to work to sort of set the groundwork for a lot of the conflict that comes that eventually ends up being the Civil War, and a lot of things that exist in this country still to this day sort of stem from decisions that were made at this time. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your Monday. I will see you all in class.